The arrival of Kickstarter and the unfulfilled desire for exciting new MMOs combined with Unreal Engine's capability to make absolutely anything look beautiful was the perfect formula for the introduction of MMO scams into the world. Today we're going to talk about the 5 most interesting MMO scams to exist so far. We'll talk about how they came to be and perhaps most importantly, where they are now. Was it malice or ignorance that led to millions of dollars disappearing while having nothing to show for it? Which ones went to jail and which ones got away with it? And were we wrong about any of them? Let's find out. First up, Chronicles of Elyria. This was another fascinating one to follow, with a story that's going to start to sound very familiar as we go through this list. It all starts on Kickstarter, led by a man named Jeremy Walsh. Was it malice or ineptitude that caused this to play out the way that it did? Let me know down in the comments what you think. It all starts on September 18th, 2015. The first screenshot was shared on the company's Twitter feed. Remember what this looks like. It's going to be important because this is not what was delivered. Then, ironically, on April 1st, 2016, the first gameplay footage is shown in a video titled Meet the Team. Again, remember what this footage looks like. Then on May 3rd, 2016, Soulbound Studios announces its long-awaited Kickstarter campaign asking for just $900,000 and promising this. Aging, Dying, and Souls, an epic 10-year storyline invites you to experience your character over multiple lifetimes. With each life, you will develop your character and make your mark in the Chronicles. When your character eventually dies, their soul will be reincarnated stronger than before, and their spirit and destiny will live on in another character of your making. The game being described was on a scale never before seen. It was going to have every system and feature that you've ever wanted all rolled into one massive MMORPG, or at least that's what they told us. And apparently it worked. Just 1 month later, on June 3rd, 2016, they hit their Kickstarter goal, with 4 people going as far as donating $10,000 each so that they would be considered royalty in the game. At this point in 2016, Soulbound Studios claimed they would have the game in players' hands in just over 18 months. Not finished, but at least in a playable state. After raising $1 million on Kickstarter, Jeremy announced the game would continue to raise money on its own personal website. And raise money it did, to the tune of over $8 million. As the deadline for the game approached in 2017, Jeremy announced that the game isn't going to meet the deadline he had promised due to their inability to attract talented developers. The first sign that things really weren't going well. Fast forward to 2018, when everyone was originally expecting the game to be in a playable state, and it was not. In fact, no one had any proof that there was a playable game at all. No member of the public had played a single minute of it. Later in that year, November 2018, with over $6 million in funding secured, people were beginning to worry about the future of the game. They noticed it had been nearly 2 years since they saw any new footage of the game. Surely, with millions of dollars and years of work put into the game, there must be something impressive to show. Almost another year passes by, and on September 6, 2019, the first gameplay footage since 2017 is released. Remember when I told you to remember what the original gameplay footage would look like? This is what backers thought they were getting. No, it's what they were told they were getting, and this is what they got. To say that fans were disappointed would be an understatement of a lifetime. The game was now 2 years past its initial planned delivery date and 8 times over budget, and this was all they had to show for it. This was the result of 4 years of development and millions of dollars of backer money. It's here where most of the backers soured on the game, some going as far as to threaten legal action against Soulbound. On March 11, 2020, the Settlers of Elyria event would take place as a pre-alpha event to allow participation in a 45-day test of the game. Of course, this pre-alpha test included massive microtransactions to allow players to spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars buying plots of land within this unfinished game if they wanted. Amazing! It was a disaster. Players were not happy, and now with a much more realistic idea of what this game was going to be, the funding for the game stopped coming in. In an event that was only surprising to the backers with their heads 6 feet under the sand, on March 25th, 2020, Soulbound announced the studio would be shuttering. On April 6, 2020, however, there was an about-face due to the threat of legal consequences. An FAQ appeared on the COE website stating that the game would very much be released and that they did not mean to imply it was shutting down. This was likely for legal reasons, as they had promised to deliver a game in exchange for the money they'd collected. To simply state that the game wasn't coming without refunding any of the money could leave them vulnerable to some legal action. With angry backers undeterred by this promise, on August 17, 2020, a class action lawsuit was filed demanding that Soulbound refund the money for the game that they failed to deliver. Soulbound would decline the demands to refund the backers, so on February 3rd, 2021, the case was legally filed with the court. Around the same time, Elyria was posting a couple of videos a month about the progress of the game, probably to appear as though they were still working on it. So where's the game now, 2 years after all of that? And how did the lawsuit end? Was justice served? Was the people's money returned? Was anyone held accountable for the complete mismanagement of the funds? Well, I wish I could say that the court laid the law down on this man and this practice of taking people's money without the realistic possibility of being able to deliver what was promised. I wish the court case had sent a signal to would-be Kickstarter scammers, but unfortunately the lawsuit was dismissed and Walsh escaped with everything except for his reputation. He's now working on a completely different game and a completely different engine known as Kingdoms of Elyria. My guess is this game has as much of a chance of turning into a polished, finished product as Chronicles of Elyria. Whatever you do, don't give Jeremy Walsh another dime of your money for a game that isn't yet complete, because it's probable he's selling you a bridge to nowhere. I'm not saying don't buy his game when it's finished, I'm just saying don't buy his game until it's finished, which is actually fantastic advice for any of the games on this list today. Next up, we have The Day Before. This is the most recent possible scam to be added to this list, and I say possible scam because it's not really confirmed yet. This story starts in January of 2021 when a developer known as Fantastic dropped the trailer for their upcoming title, The Day Before. It was announced as an open-world survival MMO set in a deadly post-pandemic America that has been overrun by flesh-hungry infected. It caught massive attention. The public was incredibly excited for this idea, so they announced that on March 31st, 2021, they would show everyone some gameplay footage. The day before it was set to air on March 30th, they ended up delaying the trailer a week due to technical problems. The new airing date would be a week later, April 6, 9 a.m. And so on April 6, everyone tuned in and were met with a starting soon screen. They would watch this screen for over 9 hours until the stream was finally shut down. On April 9th, 2021, 13 minutes of gameplay was finally revealed. The 13 minutes of gameplay looked great as far as everyone could tell. It would look so great that the game would become the most wishlisted game on Steam, over top of games from AAA studios like Spider-Man, Stalker 2, and even Bethesda's Starfield. This caught people's attention. Fantastic accomplished this without having a great track record to stand on. Looking back at their history, they sold early access to their game called Wild 8 and then almost immediately abandoned it. They moved on to a game called Dead Dozen, which had even more problems. It went into early access and shut down completely 3 months later. Things kept getting weirder though. The trailer looked too good to be true, literally. Developers would even react to the video, stating that at the very least this looked like a vertical slice of the game that they had just created for the purposes of marketing it.
Is this in game?
The Day Before.
It is!
Oh my.
I'm getting very The Division vibes from this.
Wow, the shadows are incredible. The lighting is just excellent.
Told you,
Look at
show
this.
reflections.
Oh man.
In an MMO though, I'm skeptical.
How can they do that? I'm getting a feeling this has all been rendered. This is not.
I think it's more of a vertical slice on first impression.
Yeah.
A vertical slice, if you don't know, is this doesn't mean that the whole game is done and it looks like this. This is probably a section that they popped out and we're able to develop and carve out and make certain things look final when they're not. That's what happened with Watch Dogs. That's what happened with Cyberpunk for a lot of it. So I'm a little skeptical.
Are about to get heated.
Over here.
Here's the thing, and this is why I think it's pre-baked.
Yeah.
See, that's supposed to be another player.
Right.
Can we go back? See the way they come in? It looks like it's an animated character that's not another player, but that means that those can't actually be other players.
It could be. It could very well be. They have their own, AI players. They
to move like that, they would have to be
be.
AI, because if it was a real player, the animation wouldn't be that smooth. When you actually play a game, you're kind of jittery.
This by itself wasn't totally unheard of, but with this studio's history in mind, it starts to cast doubt on the viability of the game being delivered as promised. Things would continue to get weirder when Fantastic used a bait and switch tactic on their fans, pretending a big new announcement was coming for the day before. And then when the announcement arrived, it was actually for a completely different game? Essentially using their clout they had gained for the hype around the day before to advertise and launch another game they were working on, called Prop Night. People weren't happy about it at all, but it was somewhat smoothed over when the studio also provided a launch date of June 21, 2022. At that time, that meant the game was just over 8 months away, so people were pretty excited. Fast forward to May 3rd, a little over a month before the game's scheduled launch date, Fantastic posted an announcement letting the community know that they would be giving a big update about the game that week. And what was the big update they hyped up? The big update they got that week was that they were delaying the launch of the game another 9 months, into March of 2023. The reason for the delay? Well, there was such massive interest in the game that they wanted to spend more time making sure they got it right. Honestly, for a studio that had never seen this kind of interest, to look at its project landing at the top of the Steam wishlist and decide, hey, we better spend the time to get this right, well, it isn't all that surprising. Among the changes that would be made, they would be switching the game over from UE4 to UE5. This also isn't surprising, as we've seen multiple studios make the same move around the same time. So far, we have a lot of red flags that could be genuine mistakes or intentional deception, but there wasn't anything you could point at and say, these guys are definitely acting in bad faith. That was until they later posted a video asking for people to work on their game for free, as volunteers. Naturally, alarm bells were really sounding now. It was weird that the studio was promising to deliver a game far, far beyond anything they'd ever created before. A game massive AAA studios are afraid to attempt because of the budget it demands. But people were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt until they had a reason not to. And for a lot of people, this was that reason. How are you going to make a game that by its very nature required a AAA budget, all while using unpaid volunteers? What kind of quality would that provide? And what kind of a studio do you have to be to even be willing to publicly ask for such things? If things weren't bizarre enough, on January 4th, 2023, Fantastic released another video on their YouTube that was a poorly hidden ad for another product they were developing, some kind of office app. The whole thing was pretending to be talking about the studio and its development of Day Before, but actually it just felt like you were watching a really weird ad for some product, and that's because you were. They had now used their attention that they garnered for the Day Before to launch 2 other projects that were not the Day Before, and they had also tried to get people to work on their game for free, while also delaying the release date of the game twice. The longer the story goes on, the more the red flags pile up. And people noticed. They ended up having to turn off the comments and likes and dislikes on videos to hide the ire of the community. On the bright side, the game was going to be launching in just 3 months, so Fantastic's chance to vindicate themselves was fast approaching. That is, until it wasn't. On January 24th, 2023, the most wishlisted game on Steam was removed from Steam. In another twist, Fantastic would go on to say that it was a bug that caused it to be removed from the Steam store. But then Fantastic would later that same day post a separate post that contradicted that, saying 5 days earlier they found out that someone owned the rights to the name The Day Before. Unfortunately for Fantastic, this also was a provable lie, as there was evidence that they had received word their trademark for the name had been rejected months prior. 2 different posts with 2 different lies in the same day from these guys didn't do a lot to maintain and restore the faith of the people excited for The Day Before. With the game not even out yet, all of the red flags, and now a trail of lies leaking out of the studio, things were getting weirder than ever. People were beginning to worry if this was even a real game at all. The only trailer they'd seen seemed to have been at best a vertical slice of the game, or at worst entirely pre-rendered. But that was all going to be a problem of the past though, as Fantastic was due to show their gameplay trailer featuring real gameplay this time. Then at the last second they canceled, stating that they needed to talk to their lawyers about their name being taken before releasing the trailer. The bad news didn't stop there. The trailer wasn't the only thing to be delayed. The game's launch was also going to be delayed again for another 6 months to November of 2023. The internet was now crying scam. Everyone was beginning to think this game didn't exist. In response, Fantastic would turn around shortly thereafter and drop the gameplay trailer for the game. As expected, it didn't look nearly as good as the highly touched up trailer that came before it. And to be honest, the fact that it looked worse now wasn't surprising and isn't all that uncommon in the industry. They tend to show very early on a concept of what they are aiming to make that ends up being far more attractive than what they're actually able to deliver on down the road. We've seen a lot of AAA studios make this mistake in the past and then get rightfully called out on it by their communities afterwards. What was odd about this trailer was that the 10 minutes or so of gameplay showed a massive world that felt far from finished. It was devoid of action, a lot of walking, and not a lot going on, particularly for a game that was originally supposed to release a year ago. On top of that, viewers would also immediately notice that many of the assets in the game were purchased straight off of the Unreal Engine shop and set into the game nearly untouched. And then finally, to make things even weirder, the trailer even had sections that were an exact copy of other game trailers. In fact, it wasn't just trailers that were copies of other games. Even the game's logo was a copy of another game's logo, and so was its art. This game may still launch, but we would have to be ignoring an absolute ton of red flags to say with any level of confidence that the launch will go well. If it does end up being a scam, it will have been an impressive one, as it will be the first scam MMO to have achieved the status of most wishlisted game on Steam. I hope they prove all of the doubters wrong, but as of right now, history would suggest this game will be sold in early access before dropping in a state that is completely unfit for release, ultimately being abandoned by the developer yet again. Where is the game today? 2 launch delays later and 6 months before its newest scheduled release date. Well, on February 16th, 2023, the developer released a devlog where they talked about the journey of the game so far. The website is still up, but if you click add to wishlist, it just takes you to the front page of Steam because you can't actually add it to your wishlist because the game doesn't exist on Steam anymore. This game hasn't stolen anyone's money yet, so it's not a scam yet, but the developers have been caught lying. They've been caught copying other developers' work. They've promised the moon, and they have a history of selling unfinished games and then walking away from them. Hopefully Fantastic keeps delaying their game until it's finished, but I wouldn't spend any money on this one until it's proven to be a finished, playable product. There's just way too many red flags at this point.
If you want to be kept up to date on how this all unfolds, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button. And maybe even like the video and leave a comment if you're enjoying it, for the algorithm gods. Next up, Dreamworld, a game described as being the infinite open world MMO where you could sculpt the world and create anything you wanted with a massive catalog of objects in one single world with millions of other players. You could explore thousands of unique biomes and fight and tame Dreamworld's incredible creatures. This game claimed it would be the last game you ever played. This should have been the first red flag because the slogan doesn't even make sense. The Dreamworld Kickstarter, led by Zachary Kaplan and Garrison Bellick, made a lot of promises that were more or less impossible to fulfill. But who are they? What is Zachary Kaplan's history that allows him to believe he is capable of taking these people's money and delivering on his massive promise? Well, he opened a crowdfund for a speaker you wear on your chest back in 2015 because he claims he was hit by a car not once but twice while running with his earphones in. This man doesn't need a speaker on his chest, he needs to stop running in the freeway. Eventually, he stopped that crowdfund and promised all of his backers they would be able to purchase these speakers in just a few short months. That was in 2015, and here we are 8 years later, and the website is still up with the product still listed as coming soon. After that, he started a clothing brand, and it doesn't seem that panned out for him either. And neither of these projects are particularly horrible ideas. I won't fault anyone for trying to be an inventor or an entrepreneur. By themselves, these ideas are completely fine. The problem arises when, with those 2 failed projects behind him, he decided he would then use everything he learned about creating wearable speakers and t-shirts and applied that incredibly relevant knowledge to creating a massively multiplayer online game. Zachary Kaplan and his partner Garrison Bellick would create a Kickstarter and start hyping up their new game, and the fact that it would be able to have millions of people play together and modify the entire world at will to their heart's content. Fortunately, they didn't mislead backers by saying that they had come up with the solution to all of the problems that prevented this technology from existing already, because that would have been lying to their investors.
The largest digital world that exists today can only have thousands of people. Then we came up with a solution that allows us to have millions.
Oh. Okay, well, that's not a good sign, is it? Naturally, all of this took place where many of these stories take place, Kickstarter. While other MMOs with $400 million budgets were struggling to achieve a fraction of what Dreamworld was promising, these two were going to do it all with a Kickstarter campaign for $10,000. That's right, $10,000 and 2 people to develop something multi-million-dollar AAA studios haven't accomplished with hundreds of developers at their disposal. What could go wrong? In what I can only describe as the result of people pulling out their wallets while temporarily detached from their brains, this Kickstarter would somehow hit its goal, and then some, earning a total of $64,706. Despite the fact that it looked like every ounce of footage for this game was nothing more than random assets from the Unreal Engine store slapped into the game with no rhyme or reason. It looked like that because that's exactly what it was, as Calum Upton proved on his YouTube channel by showing each asset pack in the store. Even the main protagonist featured in all of the shots is the default mannequin from the Unreal Engine. The red flags were everywhere, but somehow that didn't stop 4 people from donating nearly $2,000 to the game. Once you have backed the game, you were promised access to the pre-alpha. However, the fine print stipulated that you wouldn't actually receive access to the pre-alpha until you also forced 2 of your friends to back the project as well. It's things like this that start to push this entire Kickstarter farther away from ignorance and closer to malice. As soon as the Kickstarter closed and they had all of their money, they went to work on the game, right? Well, no, they immediately went on vacation, causing everyone to wonder if they'd run with the money. They would eventually come back, however, and resume work on the game. They started a Discord server that used 14 to 16-year-olds as moderators so they wouldn't have to pay anyone. Like many of the stories on this list, this is one that just kept on giving. Even Zachary's ex-girlfriend chimed in on the whole situation to explain that the 9 years of game development experience Zachary claimed he had was actually nothing more than him writing ideas down on paper, at best. Garrison's claims of being a former employee at Google were also a bit misleading, as it turns out he was nothing more than an intern for a few months. She also explains that she broke up with Zach for a number of reasons, one of which being that when she went to get her wedding ring refitted so that she could actually wear it, the jeweler explained that it was so fake that it would break in half if they tried. I'm not at all materialistic, and I don't care about the size or the quality of a wedding ring. I'd argue it's the least important aspect of any marriage. But buying your fiancé a ring so fake it can't be resized and then gaslighting her for asking about it shows severe lack of communication and maturity. But this was some pretty damning information. We basically confirmed that both of these guys greatly misled their investors where it pertained to their previous experience in this type of a project. Fortunately for them, they would have a chance to prove all of their doubters wrong. As with all things like this, eventually the product would be delivered, or not. On May 20th of 2021, we'd finally get to see Dreamworld in all of its glory. The moment everyone had been waiting for. Content creator Skiasso posted a video of himself playing the alpha, and let's just say, it was somehow worse than anyone expected. This footage was pure nightmare fuel. It looked like something that someone's toddler could have made in about 5 minutes of spamming random assets into an open world in the Unreal Engine. It was unforgivably bad, probably because that's exactly what Zachary did. In fact, I'm positive someone could have made something far more attractive given just 5 minutes in the Unreal Engine, leaving everyone wondering where did the money go and what was the time spent on. But hey, maybe the game just needed more time. It was an ambitious project after all. Well, that major reveal was 2 years ago. So where's the game now? Nearly 2 years after becoming quote-unquote playable. To their credit, they did continue to try and at least give the impression that they were trying to improve the game for some time, posting weekly updates on their website and on YouTube. However, those updates mysteriously stopped a little over 2 months ago.
For all their work, their YouTube channel in its 2 years of existence has managed to gather about 500 subscribers.
So what is the future of Dreamworld? I don't think there is one. These guys set out to make an ambitious game and failed. That in itself would have been acceptable if it weren't for the fact that they misled people, claiming they had years of experience in an industry that they didn't in an effort to get their money. Claiming that they had a solution to a problem that prevented games like this from existing in the first place when they didn't, which begs the question, at which point do we call these things a con? At what point do they slide past ineptitude and into malicious intent? Let me know down in the comments below. These guys are $65,000 richer, and all it cost them was their entire reputation. Zachary Kaplan and Garrison Bellick left quite a trail of evidence on the internet at this point, telling the world exactly what type of people they are. Thanks to YouTubers like Calum Upton and KiraTV, it's been incredibly well documented, and I think it's safe to say no one in their right mind would work with these guys or give them money in the future. Next up, we have Identity. Identity is another game put on Kickstarter way back in 2015 that promised the moon. It was going to deliver not just any MMO experience, but the MMO experience, where you could do literally anything in a game full of other people doing literally anything they wanted. The world and its economy would be determined by the players playing the game. What did they need from the public? Just $150,000 to deliver an experience that AAA studios would spend hundreds of millions on. But this was 2015, before we'd seen a ton of scam Kickstarter projects materialize and fail to deliver. People's guards were down, and so they managed to collect 10 times their goal with over $1.5 million earned. How did they do this? Well, a handful of assets purchased from the Unreal Engine shop and placed into a world, of course. We are starting to see a trend here, aren't we? Pledgers were even able to spend $5,000 for packages that would allow them to go into the office and game with the development team. Except there wasn't one. There was no office, and there was no development team, just two friends. The studio was only just created immediately prior to this Kickstarter by John Vanderswet. One of the consistent problems with all of these scams is the lies. Every development studio on this list has a habit of lying. These lies were a large part of why people were willing to give their money to these projects in the first place. It is these lies that should absolutely come back to haunt them in court, but for some reason never do. In the case of John Vanderswet, his lie was that he had invested lots of his own money in the game and that he just needed the last $150,000 to get it over the finish line. He even went as far as saying, should we meet our goal here in Kickstarter, we'll have everything we need to ensure that identity gets completed. As mentioned, the game received 10 times what he asked for. John received $1.5 million. So according to him, this was now a slam dunk. He needed $150,000 but received $1.5 million. The estimated delivery of this game, according to the Kickstarter page, December of 2016. The Kickstarter closed and they began accepting additional funding on their own personal website. It wasn't until 2016, the year the game was due to release, that people started becoming suspicious of the project. Noticing that outside of the initial video of some pre-made assets placed into Unreal Engine, the only thing the developers had produced for the public were some sketches and some conversations. Yet another thing this game has in common with the rest of the games on this list. With the beta supposedly just months away, the developers still had zero footage of the game to show to the backers. Heck, they couldn't even manage to share a screenshot. The developers explained that they were simply too busy to communicate with the public due to the fact that they were hard at work on the game. So they were claiming they didn't have time to do this.
Simply hitting the print screen button here will do the trick. The image is now on your clipboard, ready to paste into Paint or other imaging programs.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's at this point that the people with a brain started to realize something was wrong, while the zealots without a brain attacked them for questioning their developers. This is the stage we see all too often in these publicly funded game development cycles. The first people to talk critically about the game and question how realistic its plans are crucified by those who have chosen to simply believe in their new higher power without questioning it. A couple of months before the beta due date, they announced that something playable would be available in 2017. This was a delay, but not a massive one. They followed this announcement up with an actual video of gameplay, much to everyone's surprise. The video received hundreds of thousands of views and was mostly well received by the audience. But now, with 2017 coming and going, despite the promise of a playable beta releasing that year, an announcement would come on November 3rd, 2017, stating that something playable would be released on March 21st, 2018. It wouldn't be the whole game, but rather just a small module, not the entire world that you could do anything you wanted, anywhere you wanted, but instead one small town square. At this point, Asylum had raised over $800,000, over 5 times what it asked for. It was also behind schedule and proposing to deliver a small fraction of the game that was promised, but at least it was something tangible that players would finally be able to boot up and play. On February 12th, 2018, they finally released a trailer with actual gameplay footage, although this footage was incredibly underwhelming. As much as backers wanted to see this gameplay, they were ultimately disappointed with what they got. This game still looked like little more than some basic assets slapped into the Unreal Engine, something we're growing all too familiar with now. Backers had one thing to keep their hopes up: the playable beta was only weeks away. That is, until Asylum delayed it again, but this time only by a month. Given players had waited this long, 1 extra month was not a big deal. Then, days before the launch, they delayed it again, this time indefinitely. And why not? They had at this point made over $1 million by delivering absolutely nothing. Players still knew next to nothing about the game, something that seems to be quite key to getting thousands of people to part with millions of dollars. Tell them you're creating something amazing while also telling them nothing at all, and watch how easily a fool and his money are separated. On November 30th, 2018, the game would finally be playable on Steam, or at least the Town Square module, which is just a name for a handful of buildings slapped together around a few streets that players could walk around. Players could no longer imagine what the game would be. Instead, they had to face what it actually was: an unplayable, unsalvageable mess. And so, with the illusion shattered, players would stop sending funding to the game. The game instantly received a mostly negative review on Steam, the worst that you could get. So where is Asylum Entertainment and its MMO 5 years later? Almost none of the bugs or problems that existed at launch have been fixed, but it gets better. It seems John Vanderswet, emboldened by successfully scamming his backers, couldn't help himself. In 2020, he would go on to explain that the studio needed more money to finish Identity, the game that had basically seen no progress in almost 2 years since its release. He explained that another developer had asked Asylum to be the publisher of their mobile game. Now, you might be wondering, why would any developer in their right mind go to this man to publish their game, given his 100% track record of failure in delivering games as a studio? Well, what he did not tell everyone is that the developer that approached him to publish their game was him. Yeah, he created a second studio to develop a mobile game while he was supposedly working on Identity. And he needed us to give him more money to fund this new game so that Identity would have the money it needed to finish. He even created a brand new Kickstarter campaign for the new mobile game called Furballs. This is perhaps the most infuriating part of people getting away with this. They dive right into it again. He claimed that none of the money from Identity went into the new mobile game and that he only worked on it on his free time while he wasn't working on Identity. Two things that are all but certainly a lie. Fortunately, this time the Kickstarter campaign would be a complete failure. People were not as easily fooled by John given the reputation that he had now rightfully earned for himself. KiraTV did some great research on John after the fact and discovered that he had consistently moved into a more expensive home despite John claiming that he lost money on the venture and had no other form of employment. One could theorize that a substantial amount of the money that was due to be invested into Identity actually was just used to buy John a nicer house. If that's the case, would anyone be surprised? Recently, Asylum put up a post a few months back at the end of 2022, reaffirming that the game is still the studio's main priority, though they are also working on other projects now. Tragically, the game itself is still available on Steam for $30, though with the reviews that it's garnered, I doubt anyone is falling for it. After 8 years and $1.6 million raised, all John was able to produce was a few assets slapped into Unreal Engine in a completely unplayable state. Whether it was malicious intent or complete ignorance, I would never invest in John Vanderswet ever again. He's proven that he's willing to embellish on his experience as a developer and failed to reach unrealistic goals, while moving into a nice house and attempting to cash in on a mobile game that he developed while supposedly working on a game that people gave him $1.5 million to develop. John Vanderswet has a new house, but he lost his reputation, proven by the fact that his second Kickstarter earned him a whopping $430. Next up, we have Day of Dragons. Day of Dragons was supposed to essentially be a survival game where you played as a dragon. You spawn in as an egg, then you have to navigate the typical survival game elements like hunger, thirst, and predators, with the twist being that you were actually a dragon instead of a person. This is simple enough, and unlike many of the games on this list, sounds like an actually achievable goal. The Kickstarter started on September 2nd of 2019 and promised to deliver the game just 2 months later. Okay, well that part sounds a lot less achievable. It set an initial goal of $12,000, but by the end of the campaign, it had made over $500,000. Once again, the demo that sold the entire game is just another asset flip demo, meaning that the supposed developer of the game simply purchased these assets on the Unreal Engine store, threw them into the game, and gave the impression that this is the type of work that they were able of producing. The Kickstarter claimed that this game had been in development for 2 years, but the developer Jo himself was a ghost. No one could find him on the internet or any proof of him having any experience in the industry, though that didn't stop Jo from making over $500,000 from this Kickstarter campaign. Jo would even go on to post pictures of work that wasn't even his own as examples of progress being made on the game, essentially lying about what was being done to the game. Seeing the success of his Kickstarter campaign, Jo greedily rushed to add more tiers of funding to the Kickstarter campaign, such as extra Dragon DLCs that founders would have to purchase to enjoy. This wasn't all though, he even intended to sell merchandise for the game he hadn't built yet. Everything he was doing and saying was 100% focused on extracting money from the people that supported his game. When accused of simply using store-bought assets, Jo denied it, claiming that he had coded a substantial portion of the game himself. But when a Linux version of the Steam build was unpacked, it revealed that there were only 4 lines of custom code in the entire game. A game he had supposedly been working on for 2 years and had secured $500,000 in funding to finish had an impressive 4 lines of code in it. When the beta of the game was finally released to the content creators to play, it was 100% asset flipped without any core functions existing in the game at all. You literally spawn in and fly around. That's it. There was no eating, drinking, or any systems in the game. There wasn't even sound. it was nothing more than store-bought dragons placed with a store-bought terrain package into a pre-created example map that came with the store-bought terrain package. But despite the fact that the game was so far from finished, to JO's credit, the game did release in 2019 as promised. So, where is the game now, almost 4 years later in 2023? Well, probably not where you'd expect actually. It's currently on Steam with recent reviews showing a very positive rating. While the all-time review is mostly positive, it's got hundreds of players online at any given moment and is receiving monthly updates to the game. Presently, you can do little more than choose one of the multiple dragons available in the game, fly around, and kill a few things. And after a $500,000 cash injection from the Kickstarter, plus the money made from the thousands of Steam sales at $20 each, and over 3 years of additional development time, it's still incredibly far from being a finished game. But players seem to be enjoying the game, thanks to the sheer beauty of Unreal Engine 5 and the gorgeous dragons they get to fly around as in this small and simple world. The fact that there doesn't seem to be much more to it than that doesn't seem to bother the customers. And if the customers are happy, that's all that really matters, right? Was this a game that was meant to be a scam, or was it just incredibly poorly handled in the early days? No one knows except for Jo. The game isn't finished, nor is it close to finished, but it's still being supported and its players are on average quite happy. So it looks like, for now at least, that Jo has been delivering on his promise of making a dragon simulator game that people could enjoy. As expected, progress is slow, as this is about as small an indie dev as you can get, but it would appear he is legitimately trying, which makes this story a nice change of pace from the rest on this list. I think the takeaway from this video should be that it's entirely too easy to make it look like you are creating something amazing in Unreal Engine, when in reality all you've done is purchased a few assets from talented individuals and slapped them into a map that you also bought from another talented individual. Most of these games showed a few moments of gameplay inside of a gorgeous engine using entirely purchased assets that would take an experienced developer mere hours to put together. They then leveraged that footage and greatly exaggerated their experience while promising the moon to successfully separate people from their money. The main difference between the MMOs on this list that ended in failure and the one that has a positive rating in Steam is that the ones that failed promised to solve technical problems AAA studios in the genre with hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal have not been able to solve. Meanwhile, Day of Dragons merely promised to be a simple game that is little more than a dragon simulator. A promise that is actually realistic to deliver on. If you take anything away from this video, let it be that. If an MMO promises to deliver everything, if it promises to have every system you can imagine, and to have player numbers the developers can only dream of fitting into a single server, that MMO is either being driven by malicious intent or severe incompetence, neither of which you should be giving money to until it's a finished product that has proven its worth. And if you do give it your money, history has shown that you will be disappointed. So be careful with those Kickstarter campaigns, friends. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the amazing content creators like KiraTV and Calum Upton, who have both done a lot to protect the MMO community from fraudulent Kickstarters by covering them in depth. Massive shout out to my YouTube members. If you want to be a YouTube member to help me make the best content I can, and for behind the scenes footage, emotes, and private Discord channels and more, click the join button down below. Please like and subscribe for the algorithm gods. And if you're into it, catch me live on Twitch over at twitch.tv/luckyghost. If you're not sure what to do next, check out one of the amazing videos popping up on screen right now.